Hello, and this is a new video for Aperture Speaks. And this week's video is actually called Layering Stacks. The reason I called this is because of the process I used in the image we're going to look at was actually just using layers to create the image, but also using 3 images in a stack. Now, the first time I actually transformed this image was a couple of weeks ago when I was actually creating a HDR. And after I finished the edit, I really hated the image. I think the HDR process was too strong. So this time I wanted to create an image again, but this time not via HDR, via something very sort of different. So the first thing I did was I took my files into Adobe Camera Raw. I had 3 images. One was 2 stops over, 2 stops under, and the proper the proper exposure. And what I did was I went into the images of this sort of amphitheater outside, and it's in a park in the city, and it had a really nice sky. And what I was trying to do was have a very strong sky, but then have quite a balanced image as well, so the sky wasn't too dominant. One of the things I was sort of worried about was creating a very dominant sky in the image, because that was the problem when I did it in the HDR. So I wanted to still have a dominant sky, but not a really super contrasted sky in that, if that makes sense. So what I decided to do was I load the images into Adobe Camera Raw, and I got rid of lens distortion and I reduced the noise. But also in the underexposed image, I actually darkened the sky some more just to give it a bit more intensity. And then in Photoshop, I loaded them into a stack. You just go File, Scripts, Stacked Images, and you then load the files that way. This is actually quite a good way, because you can also auto-align the images as well, so they all line up about right. So the first thing I did was I actually went in and I was painting in the sky, and I did this by having the overexposed layer at the top, the underexposed layer on the second, and the base exposure at the bottom. Having them both all with masks, basically to hide everything, I then painted it in with a slightly lower opacity, the different areas of the image. Now, at the beginning, I would use the apply image just to sort of see roughly which areas would benefit the most, and then I used my sort of eye to try and work it out from there. So the first thing I actually did paint in was actually the sky, just really above the tree line, and then I used the underexposed layer to paint in the trees and paint in the actual amphitheater itself. Once all that was done, this is about the point I am now in the video. I did a basic levels adjustment. I then created the image into a smart object. I did this so that I could go back into it again if I wanted to make any sort of subtle changes at all. I then applied a lens correction filter just to bring the perspective in correctly, using the central part of the amphitheater as my sort of guides as to what perspective should be. I then actually did some cleanup using the patch tool, using Constant Aware to sort of patch the grass, because it wasn't really symmetrical, and I quite like symmetry. And then what I decided to do was to send it black and white. That was always my intention with the image, to have this as a black and white image. So once it was put into black and white, I played around with the different sliders just to get the rough tone I wanted. And then what I did is started using curves adjustments to basically, you could say, dodge and burn certain areas of the image. So once again, I started with the sky, I do a rough curve of where the sky looks about right for what I'm doing, and then I paint in the area. I think it's about 50% here. It's usually a bit higher than what I did, but I think here is just more just being rough, and I can go back later and clean it all up if I want to. And I then adjust the curves again, just because although when you're first creating it, you're toning the image, or you're toning that part of the image, looking at it, and then you can then sort of go back and look and go, okay, that looks about right, that doesn't look right, and things like this. Next bit I actually did was attack the trees. I wanted the trees a little bit lighter, and although I got the brightness of the amphitheater, this very sort of white tone, I didn't really want to have black or very dark trees and then have a darker sky. So it was sort of just finding the best solution within the whole image to try and just balance it out. So I had the trees slightly lighter, and then I'm also lightening these bushes just to give some definition so it complements what is happening in the sky. I actually darkened the grass because I quite like the idea of having this sort of darker foreground in the image, just to sort of pull your eye into that central part of the theater before going up and before going up into the sky. I next actually sharpened the image at this point just to see the image sharp. And then what I did is I could see in the sky there was slight rays of light, and I just wanted to emphasize this. So I spent a little time actually just making this manipulation to the image. Now the file was getting quite big at this point, and you have to do a little bit of playing around. So it took the actual effect took a little bit longer than I was expecting, but it sort of works itself out in a way. Basically, what it is you take the layer and you do a levels adjustment on the layer, pulling the midtones to the highlights, which basically darkens the image. And once you've got these sort of streaks, you can then apply a radical blur to the image. And I think I was actually just making a cup of coffee at this moment in time. It will pick itself up in 1 second. There we go. And this is when you have this sort of great big sort of long lines of light. Now I was very sort of conscious that I didn't want this to sort of detract as the main part of the image. It's meant to be like a subtlety to the image. So I just sort of played around looking at different ways this could be worked. And actually one way I did do this was I reduced the amount of the effect so that you just see it in certain areas in the clouds itself. I went and also created a mid-tone adjustment, just for the sky, just to bring out some areas. I was very sort of conscious as well that these bits of the tree, these bits of leaves on the trees, seemed a little bit too dark, so it didn't quite look right. So I sort of tried to paint that in just to make it look okay. And then of course now I'm just naming all my layers because I don't want to be lost when I next look at this image. I cropped the image to like a 10:8 size, and I cropped it, and this was sort of the cropping which I was planning to do, but I did it at the last minute just because I wanted the image to look sort of nice. So there you are. This is my converted image. I do think this looks really quite nice now. It looks a lot better than the previous adjustment, mainly because I have this sort of brightness at the bottom, which is subtly contrasted. It is everything does contrast each other, but then when you go up to the sky, you're met with this sort of really sort of detailed and fierce sky, and you can see this sort of explosion of rays of light coming from the top, sort of forcing the sky to break, which personally I think looks quite nice. It's a very sharp image, so there is a lot of details all around. Although the amphitheater doesn't look the most beautiful picture in the world, it is a really nice picture for the park and for the scene. So I think that sort of works well. I don't know what the use for it would be, but there you are. So that's the final image, and I hope you enjoyed the video. So you can catch me on my blog, which is aperture64.wordpress.com, and you can also catch me on Twitter, which is @aperture64, and I also have a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/aperture64. This time with aperture64 spelled out in words. Until next week, I hope you have a great time shooting photographs, and I will see you then. Bye-bye.